Before we start, I wanted to tell everyone that A section means Harry or someone else is speaking in Parselmouth. Thank you and enjoy. Chapter 10, Class is in session. Harry hated Mr. Civility. He would have been quite willing to learn the unforgivables, as long as he could practice on the loathsome little man. In his more mature moments, Harry realized that his intense dislike of the man was probably a touch unreasonable. Though a bit too prim and proper, the man wasn't unkind. He was always polite, and often made little jokes to emphasize certain points of Harry's lessons. Nevertheless, whenever the man entered the room, Harry was struck by an overpowering urge to set him on fire. It probably was due to the fact that the man had responded to Harry's statement that he had been kidnapped with, "Don't be silly. I'm sure you and your guardian is such a nice man. They are just having a little misunderstanding." Now, this fork is only used with shellfish. I know it's a bit overwhelming, Harry, but when in doubt, observe and copy your host. Truly, you are a fortunate young man to have found a place in such an illustrious family. I'm sure that you'll fit right in, once you've practiced. The man gave Harry one of his happy smiles. Though the man had seemingly memorized every obscure etiquette rule since the 17th century, Harry thought he was way too happy to be entirely right in the head. Scowling, Harry returned his attention to the row of silverware in front of him, only to feel his legs glued to the legs of his chair. Not even bothering to struggle, he tossed the shrimp fork onto the desk and waited. A few moments later, Voldemort swept into the room and seated himself, dismissing the tutor with a nod. Harry idly wondered if Snape had learned his dramatic entrances from Voldemort. "Mr. Civility tells me you are progressing nicely." Harry nodded warily. Voldemort had to know that he had tried to get the tutor to get him out of here, or at least send a message. However, Voldemort pretended ignorance. The few times they had met over the last week, it had been over elaborate meals so Harry could practice his new manners and Voldemort could check his progress. The smug bastard flatly refused to discuss anything more important than the history of the soup spoon. "UOWLs are coming up this year. Though I understand that your education has been a broken bar frequently disrupted, we shall make up for that now. I have arranged for a 6th-year Ravenclaw to tutor you and a few other children your age." Harry gaped. Children? What kind of parents would send their kids to the Dark Lord's house for a study group? I know they're his minions, but still a broken bar. Voldemort continued, what passed for warmth leaving his tone. "You will dress and behave appropriately, or you will spend the semester here, and not at Hogwarts." Harry bit back a defiant retort and nodded. "Eye on the prize," he reminded himself. "Your new friends," Harry grimaced, but remained silent as Voldemort spoke, "will be arriving in 2 hours. Make certain you are ready." "Yes, sir," he muttered. Exactly 2 hours later, Harry was prepared. In fact, he'd been ready for well over an hour, driven by sheer boredom. "A section is young Master Bean ready?" "A section," a small voice asked. He whirled towards the sound, only to jump back from a small, mutant house elf, a broken bar thing. It was shaped like a house elf, but was covered in mottled green-brown scales. It was wearing a leather jerkin and small belt, from which hung a pair of sheathed knives. "A section, young master?" "A section," it asked again, forked tongue flickering from a mouth full of needle-like teeth. It frowned, flicking its tongue quite deliberately. "It's smelling me," Harry realized, "just like a snake." The elf gestured at Harry's books, which floated obediently behind the elf. "A section, young master does not need to be afraid. Sesfi will protect young master." "A section," it reached out, gently petting his arm with one scaly hand, its strange eyes filled with adoration. "A section, a broken bar, thanks, Sesfi." "A section," he said. The house elf smiled at him, then turned towards the door that had emerged. Harry followed it, searching the hallway with curiosity. This place is crazier than Hogwarts, he thought. He'd only been allowed out of this room once since he'd arrived, and that had been to attend Voldemort's little Death Eater party. Then, the door to his room had been directly facing the entrance to the dining hall. This time, however, Sesfi had emerged onto a whimsically beautiful hallway. The flagstones of the floor and walls were a pristine eggshell color, the perfect setting for the beautiful mosaics set in the walls. The mosaics were thousands of minuscule chips of stone, and precious and semi-precious gems. Each portrayed a different serpentine creature. He recognized rune spores and ashwinders from his lessons with Hagrid, and the Hydra from reading Greek myths in school. Unlike the hideous painting that one of the Death Eaters had brought, There were no scenes of death or violence. Harry could have looked at the mosaics for hours, as Sesfi not gently prodded him along. Clearing his throat nervously, Harry commented, "A section, you're dressed differently from the other house elves I've met." "A section," Sesfi nodded, tail lashing behind it as it marched importantly towards their destination. "A section, we as being Lord Slytherin's liege elves, Sesfi as being the young master's guard elf, Sesfi is brave and fierce." "A section," it touched the pair of knives, baring its teeth at some imaginary threat. Harry nodded, trying to appear appropriately impressed. "A section, we has arrived. Young master is studying hard and using all of his smartness." "A section," the elf's tone was stern, and Harry quickly nodded. The door swung open and Harry entered the room, his books floating behind him. The large windows were frosted glass, filling the room with soft, plentiful life. 6 large desks had been arranged in a semicircle facing an enormous blackboard. A tall, skinny boy with glasses was sifting through a stack of volumes. Hi," Harry said, feeling suddenly very nervous. The young man gave Harry a brief, polite smile. "Hello, Potter. I'm Eddie Carmichael. Ravenclaw, 6th year." Harry's books settled themselves on the desk. "Well, I guess that's where I'm sitting," he said with a nervous laugh. "Who else is coming?" "Parkinson, Crabbe, Goyle, Malfoy, and Bulstrode." Harry grimaced. "Give them a chance, Potter. Once you get out of Hogwarts and away from all of that inter-house drama, almost anyone will be a lot less annoying." "If you say so," Harry said dubiously. He sat at his desk, idly opening the drawers and examining the contents. Rolls of parchment, high-quality quills, and several leather-bound notebooks. Opening one labeled Potions Journal, he thumbed through the pages, noting the lettered tabs. Hearing voices, he glanced up. Draco Malfoy paused in the doorway, looking decidedly uncomfortable. He eyed Harry, looking caught between smirking and turning up his nose. "Family isn't destiny," Harry told himself firmly. With that in mind, he gave the other boy a polite smile. "Hi, Malfoy." Malfoy looked briefly surprised, then gave Harry a polite nod. He scanned the room and, obviously coming to an important decision, placed his books on the desk to Harry's right. "Heir Broken-Bar, is this seat taken?" "Nah, I'll just tell my imaginary friend to move." Draco laughed weakly and sat down. The two boys sat in an uncomfortable silence, watching as Carmichael continued to flip through books and make notes on a long scroll. "So, Potter Broken-Bar, my father says he expects me to make nice." "Really?" "Actually," he said, "Draco, you are being blessed with a second and last opportunity to rectify your abominable first impression on Mr. Potter. I shall be very displeased if you waste it," Draco said in a snooty tone, his nose turned up. Despite the other boy's levity, Harry could sense anxiety. He shuddered to think what Mr. Malfoy might do if he were very displeased. "Well, I've been told that if I don't behave myself, there will be dire consequences." He didn't want to tell Malfoy about Voldemort's threat to keep him from Hogwarts. Malfoy might decide to sabotage his efforts. Anxious or not, he was a spoiled brat. "So, if anybody asks, we're getting along smashingly. And my manners have improved vastly." Harry heaved a put-upon sigh. "Deal." Draco smirked at him. "I'm trying out for Chaser this year. I've grown a bit too tall for a Seeker." "Lucky you're still so broken-bar petite. You'll probably be small enough to play Seeker until 7th year." "Chaser, huh? Should be good for you." "You've been needing a change of pace," Harry returned with a sharp smile. Draco acknowledged his score with a twitch of an eyebrow. The rest of the Slytherins finally arrived. Goyle and Crabbe acknowledged him with nods, while Pansy gave Harry a bright, wholly insincere smile. Bulstrode's look was coolly assessing. Despite her thug-like build, she was quite sharp. Pansy immediately claimed the seat on Harry's left. Goyle and Crabbe seated themselves in the 2 seats to Draco's right. Bulstrode, wearing a resigned expression, sat next to Pansy. "So, Potter Broken-Bar, or would that be Lord Potter?" She gave him a flirtatious, predatory smile. "Potter's fine." Pretending to look through his books, Harry flicked a glance at Malfoy, catching his disgruntled expression. He mentally cursed Pansy for disrupting their fragile truce. Carmichael interrupted the increasingly tense atmosphere, clearing his throat and announcing, "We're going to be spending these sessions working on test-taking strategy, study skills, and any courses you feel you need help with." He gave a small smile. "I received an OWL in all 11 courses, so I'm sure you'll agree that I'm more than qualified. This is more of a guided study group than a formal class. Any questions? Hermione had often blathered on about testing taking strategies and study skills. In fact, she had actually attended classes that taught these skills. Unfortunately, she wasn't terribly good at explaining things. Harry rather thought she was just too smart to teach regular people, so her attempts to teach Ron and Harry had usually ended with a row and the two boys wandering off to the Quidditch pitch. I'll explain my test-taking strategies, because they will shape the material we study this summer. My father was a Ravenclaw, but my mother was a Slytherin. He gave the class a sharp smile. Keep in mind that the OWL exams fall under the authority of the Ministry of Magic. 1. He held up his forefinger. They have to pay for all expenses incurred in the testing process. And 2. He held up a second finger. They are liable should anything untoward happen during the tests. Now, what does this mean for you, the test taker? The ingredients for the potions practical will be common and non-reactive. I would guess most will be mundane, rather than magical, Draco drawled, examining his fingernails. Carmichael nodded. Exactly. Mundane ingredients are inexpensive and far less likely to combine into something lethal, should the brewer make a mistake. However, what your potions practical lacks in expense, it will make up for in complexity. Keep in mind that, unlike your other exams, you will get exactly one chance. You only get one set of ingredients, and none of the neutralizing agents that might allow you to correct a mistake. You should all have one of these, he added, holding up the tabbed book Harry had noticed earlier. I suggest you begin to write down the particulars of every potion you've worked on in class. Start with 4th year and work back. Whenever you study a potion, make it a habit to look over the basics of the animals and plants your ingredients came from. This way, you study for 3 courses at once. I've included a list of common potions made in OWL practicals. I suggest you add those as well. Today, we're going to begin working on the Erudition Memoria, or a learning memory potion. This is a Ravenclaw favorite and dead useful. It enhances the ability of the brain to absorb and retain knowledge. Now, this won't make you any smarter. What it will do is put you in a state where you can learn at your absolute best. There are many drawbacks. 1. The drinker must brew it himself. Drinking someone else's Erudition Memoria can be toxic. Number 2. The drinker must be relaxed when he takes it. Therefore, taking it for a last-minute cram session is not advised unless you want to spend a few days in the hospital wing, or on your knees in front of a toilet. It's also fairly tricky to brew. The good news is that, correctly brewed, it will stay potent for over a year. Carmichael tapped the blackboard, and instructions began to scrawl themselves across the surface. Following Carmichael's instructions, Harry carefully copied the recipe in his new journal, then began brewing. While lacking Snape's brilliance, Carmichael was a good instructor, willing to inspect each ingredient before it was added and offering advice. Malfoy, of course, was finished first. Malfoy's potion is finished. Now, I'm going to show you a useful little spell that will impress your OWL examiner. He spooned a small amount of the potion into a glass bowl, then pulled a short wand from his pocket, and said, Capsula. A droplet of the potion separated from the rest. Carmichael caught the now solid drop in his hand. Portable and a perfect dose. This spell will work on most OWL practicals, because of the low volatility of both the ingredients and the resulting potions. Malfoy looked disgruntled. Professor Snape never taught us that, he griped. It's foolish wand waving, isn't it? Harry quipped. The encapsulating charm, unfortunately, will interfere with a lot of potions, especially those containing potent magical ingredients. Harry grinned. So, while it's not that great in the real world, it's perfect for OWLs. Exactly, Carmichael said. The magical ingredients in this potion are very stable and subtly, which is why this potion works as well as it does without the risk of addiction or brain damage. The other 5 returned to their potions. Bulstrode finished second. Goyle managed to create a weak but still usable brew. Crabbe's was a failure. Though Harry finished after Crabbe, his potion was perfect, and Pansy's was a smoking disaster. Carmichael poked the mass with a glass stirring rod, frowning. Pansy's face was angry and pinched. You want to give it another try? He asked. Pansy tossed her curls, letting loose a false little laugh. Maybe later. Carmichael shrugged. Your loss. Then, he turned and offered Harry the wand. Capsula. Harry commanded. The droplet began to form, then collapsed back in the dish. Pansy tittered. Capsula. His second try remained firm for a moment, but melted in his palm when he caught it. Capsula. Harry grinned as he snagged the translucent yellow pill. Harry's used to a much longer wand. No wonder it took him so long. She giggled, shooting Carmichael a maliciously sultry look. Very mature, Parkinson, Harry snapped, ignoring her pout. Generic wands are usually short. A few more inches won't improve the power by much, and the short length makes them good for small, precision spells. Plus, they aren't tracked by the Ministry. Carmichael seemed oblivious to Pansy's nasty innuendo. Brilliant. Harry smirked at Pansy's abashed expression. This potion can be consumed in several ways. One capsule, two of yours in this case. Goily is a full dose. It gives you 24 hours of intense focus. Note that you won't be able to sleep during this time. Do not take any sleeping potions. Another method is to dissolve a capsule in water, and drink the water over the course of a day. The effects are less intense this way. It's especially useful when you're in a foreign country and wish to learn the language. I spent a month in France and used this diluted version every day, and came home nearly fluent. I advise you try this one at first. Dissolve one capsule in a gallon of water, and drink 1 ounce each hour. A third method is to work the potion into a candle or incense, and burn it when you study. I don't recommend this, since you are likely to make your roommates ill. Knowingly exposing others to your erudition memoria constitutes reckless endangerment, and carries a term in Azkaban. Because of this reason, students are not allowed to possess this potion at Hogwarts. You may request Madame Pomfrey or your head of house to hold it for you. Harry carefully labeled his bottle of erudition memoria. He might be able to make up for 2 years of arithmancy and ancient runes in 1 summer, after all. Chapter 11. Parent-teacher conference. Harry spent the evening painstakingly copying 4 years of messy potions notes into his new journal, faithfully drinking 1 ounce of the watered-down potion each hour. Each ingredient got its own entry, along with notes garnered from his herbology and care of magical creatures textbooks. Thaumazoology was the word only a Ravenclaw or Hermione could love. His breakfast tray that morning had included his schedule for the next week. Class would start at precisely 9 a.m. and end at 3 p.m. Lunch was noon to 1. Harry almost gratefully noticed that physical activity had been scheduled from 4 to 5. His summers were full of chores, and his Hogwarts school year had Quidditch practice, not to mention all of those stairs. Now that he was getting 3 meals and 2 snacks a day, he needed to make sure he didn't end up like Dudley. Sesfie again guided him to the classroom. A large wooden table had been added. The table was covered in heaps of both dried and fresh herbs, flowers, bark, mushrooms, and live plants in small pots. Malfoy and Crabbe were already dressed in sturdy smocks, watching Carmichael fuss about with his samples. Harry dumped his books on his desk and donned a smock. He was gently removed the faded yellow petals from the dried calendula flowers when he heard a gasp. Looking up, his gaze met a changed Pansy Parkinson. If Britney Spears was a witch, and made magical music videos, she'd dress like that, he decided. Feeling a bit dazed, her elaborate makeup made her eyes huge and sultry, her lips full and pouty. Her complicated hairdo was twined around a fanciful hairpiece made of crystal and silver wire, throwing sparks of light whenever she turned her head. Though still obviously witch's robes, her clothes revealed more cleavage than he had ever seen on a witch. The long skirt had slits that ran all the way up to her hips, revealing legs just barely concealed by the gauzy, softly hued underskirt. Harry wondered if there were some weird event planned today that he hadn't been informed of. It would be just like Voldemort to spring, he thought, then caught Draco's scandalized expression. Even the unflappable Carmichael and the normally dense Crabbe looked a touch horrified. Harry turned his gaze back to Pansy. He thought her outfit rather pretty, but compared to normal magical attire, he supposed it was pretty racy. From Draco's expression, racy might be an understatement. Parkinson, you're hardly dressed for a herbology lesson, Carmichael said reproachfully, his voice coolly professional. Pansy tossed her sparkling hair and gave a tinkling little laugh. Fixing Harry with a coy look, she said, I guess I'll just have to watch, then. Fine, he said indifferently. Harry looked away from the tarted-up schoolgirl, groping for something to say. A broken bar. This is marigold? Is it magical marigold? Cause my aunt's marigolds don't look like this, he babbled. It's pot marigold, Potter. Though it grows quite well in non-magical areas, Its healing properties are enhanced when grown in a magical environment. Harry nodded dutifully. A quick quote Quill faithfully recorded their words. It's a favorite for use in potions and herbology practicals, though it's usually purchased from growers in mundane areas. It's used in a number of potions, and is very unlikely to combine with another ingredient and cause a catastrophe. Pansy sashayed to the table and plucked a few petals from a dried rose, accidentally letting some of the petals fall into her cleavage. Crabbe's eyes were riveted to their bee-petaled skin so generously exposed, and Draco kept his eyes fixed on the mushroom gills he was harvesting, refusing to even look at Parkinson. The last two arrived together. Goyle, who was the sharper of Malfoy's minions, Harry had come to realize, gaped for a minute at Pansy, then joined Draco in not looking. Bulstrode gave Parkinson a decidedly cold look, and took a place at the table as far as possible from the other girl. Your herbology practical will be shaped by the same considerations as your potions practical. Fresh mandrake, for example, is never included. While inexpensive, it is very volatile. Depending on how cheap the ministry is feeling, the potions practical may use samples from your herbology and care of magical creatures. Here he rolled his eyes at the name exams. If you have either of those exams before your potions exam, make sure to review any potions using the samples you worked with. Harry had always found herbology rather unpleasant. He'd never forgotten Professor Sprout's coldness to him during his second year, which Finch-Fletchley had been petrified, and again during his fourth year, when his name had spewed out of that damn goblet. The fact that he'd spent sweltering summer days tending his Aunt Petunia's plants didn't make the class any more pleasant. Despite his misgivings, the study session was surprisingly enjoyable. All five of them, Pansy refused to cover her new clothes with a smock, spent the morning cleaning and preparing the pile of samples Carmichael had brought. Malfoy enjoyed showing off his rather impressive potions knowledge, discussing various brews the different plants could be used in. Harry's experience as a gardener, something he'd never thought to apply at Hogwarts, helped him identify which of the live plants were in distress, and some suggestions for remedies. After cleaning up, they sat down to a hearty lunch. Harry was impressed at how smoothly Carmichael was managing 5 fractious personalities. He had established himself as their leader, rather than their teacher, easily quelling arguments and providing answers to questions, yet also laughing at their jokes and engaging in conversation. However, without the shared topic of herbology to engage them, they fell silent as the meal began. Goyle finally cleared his throat, and asked, "So, Potter, how's Muggle food different from regular food?" Pansy rolled her eyes, but Crabbe looked up from the chicken he was devouring. Goyle said the magic word. Harry thought, well, Muggles don't have house elves or magic to help them, so they've invented a lot of appliances to make things easier. He began. Appliances? Draco asked, tasting the strange word. Yeah, like toasters and ovens and microwave. As a broken bar he paused, taking in the confused looks. Let's start with toasters, he decided. Toasters are simple, aren't they? A toaster is a metal box with slits in the top big enough for a slice of bread, he explained. There are wires inside that heat up and toast the bread. Why not use a fire and a toasting fork? Goyle asked. Broken bar toasters are faster and easier. Most Muggles don't use fire to cook with, except just for fun. The Slytherins looked dubious, obviously not getting what fun someone could possibly have cooking with fire. Harry forged ahead. Ovens are pretty much the same, except they run on electricity rather than wood or magic. And microwaves heat stuff. Ovens heat food. Why would you need this microwave thing if you have an oven? Bulstrode asked. Ovens cook food. Microwaves just heat it up. Harry tried to clarify. You know, when you don't have time to make something, so you just heat up leftovers. They all wrinkled their noses fastidiously. The rest of the hour was spent explaining the concept of frozen dinners, popcorn, and other uniquely Muggle culinary delights. Late that afternoon, as the students gathered their things, Carmichael announced, "Tomorrow we'll be reviewing Thaumazoologia, otherwise known as Care of Magical Creatures," he added for Crabbe's benefit. "Great, another fun day of Death Eater Day Camp," Harry remarked, feeling a certain pleasure at the shock his offhand remark elicited. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, Sesfi escorted Harry to yet another strangely convenient room. "Good afternoon, Harry," Snape's familiar voice greeted him. The professor was wearing trousers, boots, and a black tunic over a white shirt. He had a gently curved sword in each hand. The Dark Lord has decided that you are to be instructed in the art of the sword. Contrary to Muggle techniques, wizards often learn to wield a sword with their offhand, since magic is the primary weapon. However, less powerful wizards may choose to focus primarily on swordsmanship, and secondarily on magic. The best war wizards may switch wand and sword hands with ease. With a graceful twist of his wrist, he offered Harry the second sword, hilt first. Today we will work on some basic exercises. Harry spent a surprisingly tiring hour practicing a few basic moves and stances, switching the sword from hand to hand. The controlled, yet powerful movements were far more difficult than they looked. The walls all had floor-to-ceiling mirrors enchanted to show the occupants from a variety of angles. Harry could stare into the mirror in front of him and get a view of himself from the left, right, or even behind. Snape nodded as Harry completed the last set of exercises. That's enough for today. He held out his hand, and Harry returned the sword, making a clumsy attempt of the move Snape had used earlier. Snape raised an eyebrow, and said, "Try to avoid maiming yourself in an attempt to impress me, if you please." Harry blushed as Snape relieved him of the sword. "Thanks for the lesson, sir," he said politely, then obediently followed Sesfi back to his room. Snape bowed politely and seated himself at the small table. Voldemort's eyes were half-lidded as he basked in the late afternoon sun poured into the small, elegant room. The Carmichael boy was already seated, sipping his tea and trying to hide his nervousness. The two exchanged nods and remained silent, unwilling to break the Dark Lord's meditation. After several moments, the Dark Lord emerged from his half-trance. "How are Harry's lessons proceeding?" Carmichael wet his lips nervously, then replied, "Quite well, my lord. His practical work is excellent, so far." "Then why, do you suppose, that his marks at Hogwarts do not reflect this?" the Dark Lord said softly, testing for untruths born from a desire to flatter. Carmichael straightened his spine, and responded calmly, "Hogwarts marks reflect the results of essays and tests, rather than practical application. The current administration works to create a hierarchy based on qualities besides individual magical power." Severus was impressed by both the boy's calm demeanor and his understanding of the realities of his educational system. "What are your plans for the rest of the summer?" "Most of our time will be spent in discussion and review. Mr. Potter seems to do better with someone to guide him, rather than active direction." "And your other students?" "With the exception of Miss Parkinson, they seem to be working well together and enjoying each other's company." "Is Miss Parkinson a problem?" "She is attempting to create a conflict between Mr. Potter and Mr. Malfoy. Mr. Malfoy seems a bit jealous, and Mr. Potter a bit unnerved." "Would removing her be beneficial?" Carmichael considered his answer before replying carefully. "She is not interested in working, my lord, and is becoming a distraction to the other students. I believe that, without the pressures of house competition, Mr. Malfoy and Mr. Potter have an excellent chance to become friends, and Miss Parkinson is definitely an obstacle to that end." The Dark Lord steepled his fingers. "I will consider it." "Arrive tomorrow at the same time." Carmichael nodded, and left the room after a polite bow. The Dark Lord looked at the potions master. "Your thoughts, Severus?" "I agree with Carmichael's assessment of Harry's abilities to an extent. However, I also believe that he has sought to retain his current friendships by not outshining his friends. With the exception of a few truly remarkable instances, like the Patronus charm, Harry's marks and classroom performance have remained on a par with Mr. Weasley's." The Dark Lord frowned. "Have his friends encouraged this self-handicapping of his?" "I doubt it, my lord. I believe it is a habit he learned from his Muggle relatives. His marks rarely rose above those of the Dursley boy. He is studying hard this summer, so desire to learn is not the issue. I will inform him that his remaining at Hogwarts is contingent upon his marks. I will review his performance after the first term, and then determine if more stringent measures are necessary."